Good evening. I got to think about this. I have made so many videos about how to do this, that, and the other thing to the car for the interested viewer. And the primary reason why I started doing the videos was not so much because I wanted to put videos up on YouTube or become a YouTuber, but it was really the lack of information on the second version 126s, with the 5.6 and 4.2 liters. There's a lot of stuff with the R107s is out there, the earlier, the 3.8, 5.0 liter, which have somewhat a different fuel system altogether with the warm-up regulator and that sort of stuff, and they're not as, with the KE Jetronic ECU, and the idle speed control is a little bit different. And those things, there's plenty of stuff out there. People have made many videos, on how to change the brakes and calipers and do the steering stuff and, those kind of things. And since I was involved with the engine manufacturing and on the electronic side, assisted them with the R&D for those for the V12s. And to a certain extent, not in the R&D, but in the fabrication of the 5.6 and 4.2 liter engines. And this is what I wanted to talk about tonight with my time here in Untertürkheim. This is what you're looking at. This is the main factory in Stuttgart Untertürkheim. Untertürkheim is a section of Stuttgart. And let me turn off the night light. That way we can see it a little bit clearer. And you're looking here at the main factory. This is the world headquarters of the Daimler Corporation and Mercedes-Benz. The main building here, this view is now going southeast. That is the southeast direction. This here is the River Neckar. Over here is Wangen. In this little town here, underneath, nestled in the vineyards, is Untertürkheim. That's where they're making the wine. Over here in Wangen there's wine too, but it is on top of the hill, which you can see it because they're facing the north side and they're facing the southwest side down here, so that's why you got all the wine here. In my time, we're talking now a time frame from 1987 to 1991, on and off. I was there as a consultant. I didn't have a full-time job there. I worked there as a consultant. And I know this facility inside out because I have been in many of these buildings. The main thing is over here, this wasn't in existence. This is now the new Daimler or Mercedes-Benz Museum. The museum was used to located in this building over here at my time, which was fairly new. And out here in the back part of it, that was the original Mercedes-Benz Museum at the time, and I think it extended into this building back here too. This here was belonging to the soccer club. This is our big soccer stadium where the first league or major league soccer team plays. And this was just a grass area here, and this road here, they didn't have to circle. You were going straight, 2 lanes. This is the main gate going underneath the elevated highway here. And I do not think if the highway, I can't remember this, I don't think that the highway was elevated yet, or it was actually, yeah. Underneath here is the main gate. There's a main gate here, and there's a main gate on the opposing end here. And these are the main 2 gates. There is a 2-lane road going straight through. This whole section probably spans, I would say, about 2 kilometers, which is a 1.25 miles or something like this. When you walk from this gate to the other, it takes at a brisk walk about 20 minutes or so to actually walk through there. This is how large this is. It's somewhat hard to tell. This here is the newer, so this is the main gate, and the first thing you had here is what they call the first confrontation. Anyone with the outside world coming in there, and all employees, 18,500 of them. had to walk through either one of the two gates, and the people there is called Werkschutz, WS, that was their security services. And they were dressed in black, and they had a gray mark on their black jackets which said Werkschutz. And when you looked at this, you felt like you were catapulted back into the 1930s with Adolf's guys. And that's sort of what they were. Short hair, all 6 foot tall, no nonsense approach, and they were allowed to search anyone coming in there, going out there. And this is now a time, especially for the younger people, there was no cell phones, there was no smartphones, there was nothing you could take pictures with except for regular cameras and video equipment with VCR type video cassettes. Or half-inch U-matic type tapes, what the TV stations used. So they would look in your bags if they had a suspicion. If you had any type of photographic equipment, they had a lockbox there. You had to surrender this to them when you went in there to visit or as an employee, and they would keep it in a lockbox, and you could get it back when you left there. There was absolutely no photography allowed, filming whatsoever, and that was strictly enforced. So there's only very limited material and video available which Mercedes-Benz has published, in which you can see and sometimes find, but the reality is most people have no clue on how this actually works inside this facility. Let me just point out a few major buildings here. On the right-hand corner here, this is the main warehouse for parts. This here and this, all of the stuff here is the R&D facility. This is where they have their CNC machines and I mean every type of equipment you need to produce or fabricate a part, in a metal shop, in a full-blown fabrication metal shop with everything that comes with it. And I believe in one part over here in this building here, this is in that lower part, they had converted one area over for the wind channel. So I think that was on the first floor. I was in there only once. And this part here, as you can see, this is the test track, which goes all the way around, and this is their private test track. That's the what they're using when you see these videos where they're driving with the open cars over that bumpy road and that sort of stuff. This is all done here, and they have a building here and so far and so on. And the main R&D offices are in here. This is when you see when they're designing the cars with the clay models, and they have the designers there. You got your palm tree, your office palm tree in the corner and that kind of stuff. This was located here in this building, and this here was all drafting, CAT, and they were connected between these two buildings. Were connected, and then the museum underneath here in the back, going back before they moved to this new area here. On the other side here, this building here, it's a little bit difficult to see. This is the world headquarters of the Daimler Corporation. They had built a new headquarters out by the airport in Stuttgart, and the Daimler executives should have moved out there. I don't know if they did that. Would have been done sometimes in the 92, 93, somewhere around there, 94. I was already in the United States. At the point when I worked there, Edzard Reuter was the CEO of the Daimler Corporation, and I forgot the fellow's name who ran Mercedes-Benz. And on the top floor, they have the executive cafeteria and some conference rooms and that sort of stuff, presentation rooms. And then on the top floor were the Daimler executives, and on the floor below were the CEO, CFO, the real big guys. And then on the floor below was Mercedes-Benz, and then you had Deutsche Aerospace, Dornier. They had offices in there. So all the corporate headquarters people from all those corporations, Daimler Corporation owned, were in that building. And The executives would be driven up by their drivers in 560 SELs at the time. Most of them were armored, the special edition one, because of the nature and the political situation we had back then. And so you would see them. I think I've seen Edzard Reuter 2 or 3 times while I was there. When he was there, they travel a lot and do a lot of stuff. But this is basically the administrative side of this. All the other offices you have along, there weren't really that many, but this was the primary stuff. All the other stuff like accounting and human resources and all of this stuff, they were in different parts of Stuttgart. They were not located there. This was basically only R&D, engine manufacturing, and the world headquarters for Mercedes-Benz and Daimler Corporation. And back here in this area before, that was one cafeteria. There was one cafeteria here in the middle, and then there was one at the other end, so the people didn't have to walk that far. The workflow from the raw materials. Now let me show you this here. This building here was fully climatized. And this part center was where they had all the parts they received, which were for the engine assembly necessary for the final assembly. This is where the starters from Bosch winded up in the already mounted fuel distributors, calibrated, adjusted fuel distributors were already mounted by Bosch to the lower housing, to the air fuel mixture unit, and that was all adjusted and to very high tolerances and clean room environments, and they were stored here until they came together over here in the engine, in the final assembly. I will get to this in a minute. The workflow basically starts out here in this back building here where the raw materials were delivered. There's another small gate, but this gate is only for trucks. And this is where they would deliver raw aluminum, raw steel, sheet metal, and that sort of stuff, whatever was needed to manufacture the parts which were not manufactured by third-party vendors like Bosch or VDO or, Mahle, for instance, Kolbenmahle, those things. The first part here, back here, is the delivery area where they had the engine blocks delivered. This facility makes all engines, whether it was the diesel engines and the different versions. They had 4-cylinder, 5, I don't know if there was a 6-cylinder, I don't think so. 4, 5-cylinder diesels, and then all the regular gasoline engines, no matter what they were. And the process started out back here in that building to the left with the and this here with these heads on it. This is the area where the piston rods were made. They had 5,200-ton press, and these presses, they received the steel or aluminum, whatever it was, precast, and they would be then forged in there. Some of it with heat, some of it without heat, some of it was molten aluminum, and they mixed this. This is all in this whole back area here was all the metal fabrication, which required heat and cooling and machining of it. And then this whole thing moved further over here in it basically went around in a in clock motion. Then you had a other, this is hard to see, this is this building here all the way back here. This is another parts department, and that's where all the parts were located which went into the lower engine block. So your timing chains, the guides for the timing chain tensioner, all the different bearings, seals, and that sort of stuff, gaskets, that was back there. And so the engine, the raw fabrication was here. It moved then into the finishing area in this building. That's where all the engine blocks were finalized, and they went on conveyor systems through this, and people would work on it. And then the engine moved basically from one building to another underground, because there's little streets going over it. And then so in this section here with these roofs in here, this is where the engine basically was preliminarily put together on the lower halves, and the final assembly was this building here, which you can see has 1, 2, 3, 3 floors, 4 floors, and they had break rooms back in each corner here. This is where they had the vending machines. This was a place I was in, and I will show you this in a second of what that actually looked like in there, because I found a video from Mercedes-Benz where they're actually showing this. And this is not a very good picture, but this is where the engine blocks basically were reworked. The ones which were assembled the floor below, which didn't pass the test, they moved up, and you can see these windows here, these big white windows. This is an old building, and you can see this is these windows right here, what you're looking at. And I believe that department was either on the 2nd floor or on the 3rd floor where they reworked the engine. And we're going to go through this. Let me show you this. This is the lower floor where you can see now. I'm sorry about the picture quality, but the video quality we had available was very poor. Like I said, there was no videotaping or photography allowed in that during that time whatsoever. In these bins, this is how they come from their warehouse back there, and that's where you have all your parts in it: injectors, seats, injectors, all the different gaskets, the oiler tube stuff, and you name it. The whole thing what goes into the engine. And they assembling these engines here on these movable jack stands. Basically, this is what they look like it, and you can see this here. You got one side here. This is the 5.6 liter engine on how they were assembled, and that's how that went. And that was on the 1st floor. And then on the, yeah, that's right, the rework was on the 3rd floor, and these people were on the 2nd floor. This is where they were putting the piston rings together, and they did more work. So whatever pre-assembled work had to be done, that was done in the 2nd floor, and that material went then down to the 1st floor. And this was the picture we just looked at. Let me just see here. Yeah, and then this here, oops. Then in the end towards the building here, this is an engine test stand. And the way this works is the engine comes in from this side, and in this case we're looking at a 6-cylinder. This is probably a 2.6 liter or 3 liter engine. They have connections there for the exhaust gas, and there is hoses coming down, clamp-on hoses, which are clamped onto the fuel distributor. And then all the sensors are hooked up over wiring harness, which also comes down from the top. And then this gentleman you see here has a computer here. And what I did with them was Siemens and Nixdorf and SEL. SEL wrote most of the software. The PLC technology came from Siemens, and Nixdorf supplied the industrial computers, which were 8088 or 286s at that point. They were pretty much, on the forefront with the stuff, or 286 type computers, industrial. They either had the orange colored or green colored, limited graphics, 480 by 640, I think it was, yeah, resolution. If you remember that the old DOS days, that's basically what you had there. And it was a cage system, that means a Euro rack system, and I developed the circuit boards for them, where Bosch gave me the details on their KE Jetronics for those cars. I took those schematics and transferred them over into a circuit board, which plugged into these cards, so the computer, all that data could be transmitted to the computer. So we had the EZL unit was basically in there, converted into a circuit board, so you can fire this whole thing up. And the way that basically worked was the connection was made to the top of the distributor on that one high voltage wire, and the high voltage line and the coil and everything else was integrated in the overhead unit, which came down hydraulically. So all connections were made. The engine was already filled at this point with oil, which was usually 2040 or 2050 at that point. And it had this first filter on it, no air filter yet or any of that stuff. and the coolant system was filled, it was basically flushed with the acid. Then automatically the machine did this, or the test booth did this automatically. It would run the citric acid through it for about 15 minutes at a temperature of close to boiling, and then it would vacuum this out. And then they would replace this with the antifreeze, which was the first fill-up of the system, basically. The engine then was started, and then the computer would measure this. The engine would be revved up. There's no transmission on there yet. There is an automatic arm which comes over from this side here. It goes on the end of the crankshaft where the flywheel usually is. And it is at that point there, which also starts to rotate the engine to get the revolution up. There's no starter yet on there. That starter will be added in the next stage after the initial test run was passed. And so the that unit which starts it also works as a dynamo, which means you can apply a load to the engine. The engine would then operate checked at cold or at ambient temperature was around, I would say 75, 80 degrees Celsius, Fahrenheit in this facility. And then the engine was basically started up and run at idle speed. Then it went through the warm-up phase. There were several additional things what we measured, and the operator here had on the screen, he would see on how the temperature would rise on the computer screen of the coolant, and he would see the idle, the RPM was there. The sensor was not yet installed because the flywheel is also missing. There's a couple things not yet on the engine, but they will be put on the next stage before it leaves it there. The entire RPM was taken off. The diagnostic sensor, which is on the crankshaft pulley, basically, where you have your timing marks on. That's where everything is basically read off and fed back into this computer system. And this was part of it, why that sensor is actually there and doesn't have any functionality in running the car, but it was basically for diagnostic services, either during engine building or the actual, when later in the car you can use this to get your zero mark, when you want to top that center when you use oscilloscopes in the system. Anyway, so then this thing runs up to full operating temperature. It has to operate within a certain margin. They get a bandwidth in there of what they have to stay in. And then they're going to put a load test on there. And that load test is going to go in, out, and they do this electronically because you don't want to do this on a new engine with a transmission because it is too jerky. And with a dynamo system, you can apply a load very smoothly, very gradually, build it up, got real fine regulation in it. And they revved this thing up to the maximum allowable RPM, which varied between 5,400 RPM to 6,200, depending on the engine. And each engine has had a tag on there, a scan tag. And what the operator would do is he would use the gun he had and read the tag, basically, a barcode reader. And that would pull up the engine data of what he was looking at. So he would do, usually they did one particular engine type on that line. They wouldn't match them. This is probably done today. At that point, they didn't. And this is actually, like I said, this is the engine booth here for the 6-cylinder. This is either 3.0 or 2.6, which were made at that time. The 5.6 liter and 4.2 liter engine booth is similar. It looks a little bit different. And these side walls, actually, they close off, like you can see this here in the back. This is dampening material. So when that engine revs up to $6,000, he has a window coming down here where he can see the engine, but he cannot hear it because it is astronomically loud when that is run. And only then, when this engine goes through that test, the flush and the initial filling and the preparation is about 15 minutes per engine in this booth. And then the test run is about 15 to 20 minutes. So they do about 2 engines, a little bit less statistically than 2 engines per hour. So you can imagine how many test booths we had there. And that was all on that lower first floor. Now, if the engine is okay, it's going to get puked out on a conveyor in front of here once it is done either way. And then it either goes straight and it goes towards an elevator, and that elevator brings that thing up to the 3rd floor, where they're going to start reworking it if it didn't pass the test. And then the engine, once it was reworked, because they had the barcode on it, they could read the computer data of what was actually wrong with the engine, do the correct repair or adjustments they needed to do, and then the engine was sent back on the other side down the elevator, and it would come back in here in this line. It would go through this test for verification again that the repair was successful, and if it was, it would go to the right towards the warehouse over there. And it went then on a truck. It was the missing flywheel was added to this, and the sensor which sits on the bell housing here for your RPM gauge was added at that point. And then the unit was shipped by truck out to Sindelfingen, where they were received, and they were about 2 days ahead to marry with the engine delivery prior to the car being actually built and assembled. Because all those cars were custom cars. All of Mercedes-Benz cars are custom cars. There is not one model exactly like the other one. They're all custom ordered, and that's why that is that process, and it takes quite a while to actually get an order fulfilled if you buy a car from Mercedes-Benz directly. In the United States, it was that way, that the dealerships would place these orders. They would order 10 560s, more or less in the same, package criteria, and they got a special price on this. And then they were built and then shipped over here. There was a purchase option program available in the United States, which was called the European Delivery Program. And you could go into your dealership and you could order the Mercedes-Benz exactly the way you wanted it, and it took about a year. You had to give them a down payment on it, which was quite big, and a year later and usually it was a year lead time they had when you ordered a car until you could actually get it. And then you could fly over to Germany. You went to Sindelfingen to pick it up, and they had a program there where they had a guided tour on the Rhine, so you go right down the Mosel, all the way up to Bremerhaven, and you're in your new car, and they had arranged a hotel and this, that, and the other thing for you. That was what they called the European Delivery Program. These were cars built to US DOT specifications. So they're not European cars. You're not going to get a German model car with the German lights and all of this stuff, and the German bumpers and German exhaust. You get the American exhaust, the American bumpers, and the American headlights in there. But you were able to build your car. You could say, I wanted purple upholstery in it, whatever the case was, and I wanted it in peach, and I wanted the air conditioner, and I wanted the extra refrigerator for the rear seat that goes in the armrest area back there, and that sort of stuff. You can order that even today if you want to spend extra money. The base version is one price, and then everything else is basically optional at Mercedes-Benz, whether it's the electric windows or a sliding roof. A sliding roof is an option. The first option, sliding roof mechanical. Then the next option is sliding roof sunroof electrical, and that's how it goes through. Adjustable headlights, non-adjustable headlights, and you could get the automatic suspension leveling system even in a 200 if you paid for it. You can get air conditioning in any vehicle, and on our air conditioning, or you can get a second air conditioning for the rear area, which is mounted in the center console, which uses the same compressor, but then they put a larger compressor on there, and on it goes. But that's basically it. And for these, I found one picture of a good friend of mine who worked there. This man here to the right is Thorsten. Oops, here he is, the man with the glasses. And Thorsten is the senior vice president for the sales for Scandinavia. And I believe these people he got here in front of this building here which is that is still the old museum. These were people who worked for Mercedes-Benz dealerships in Scandinavia. He would host these, groups visiting the main factory, like 4 times a year or something like this. This was a 2 or 3 year event. Some of them are salespeople, some of them are service technicians. Some people, they work in the parts department. Each dealership were to pick a person or 2 person out of their dealership who was able to come then there for, I think, 3 days, and Mercedes-Benz paid for all of the stuff, the flight to Stuttgart. And then Thorsten, each one of the VPs sales, and for those countries, they will host that event. So there's probably one guy who does that here for the United States, and they probably do this on bigger levels. This is now Norway, Sweden, and Finland, the 3 countries my friend Thorsten did. And he was located with his office above the old museum. That's where they had some salespeople. Here, this was here, right here. Let me show you this. This was in this building here, primarily CAD engineering, mechanical engineering with all their CAD stations. That was a big thing. That was all IBM token ring of a mainframe. And then over here you had electrical and mechanical engineering, engine engineering. And then actually in this building over here, which is this taller building here on the first floor, this is where Mercedes-Benz has actually a full-blown emergency room. They have 3 doctors on staff for every shift. If they work, our shifts go Sunday 6 p.m. till Saturday morning 6 a.m. if they work 3 shifts. And they're fully staffed in case there's an emergency. They have basically an ER, fully functioning ER with an operating room in there, and several nurses. So if there is an accident or some form of a event, they can deal with this immediately before even outside sources come out. They have 3 ambulances there, and they can either bring the doctor then immediately out to the accident site, or they bring the patient right in here. That takes only 2, 3, 4 minutes. And then if the air rescue has to come in, they land here, because the ambulance then picks them up and just drives them around right here, and they can be then repackaged, and then the helicopter goes off to the main hospitals wherever they get the trauma care they need if that happens. It happened only a couple times I was there, but in these large facilities, working with the way they do, that's that is to be expected. That's basically it. In that ER room, that's where you go when you cut yourself, or for the smaller stuff, they bandage you up right there. They can stitch you together if you needed a few stitches. Then they give you the pink slip, and then you're going to be home for a week or 2 weeks and that sort of stuff. They did this there. Or if you don't feel well and you go there, they give you medication for the flu and they send you home, and that sort of stuff. So this is really an all-around type thing. They have a surgeon there on staff, and they had an internist, internal doctor, and then general practitioner for all that other stuff which walks in. And between the 3, they can deal pretty much with everything what comes along. And like I said, that is the staff with 3, or was staffed with 3 doctors and I don't know, X amount of nurses and paramedics from Sunday 6 p.m. until Saturday morning 6 a.m. they were there. So as long as there was things in operation, there was medical services available. And then of course they had 8 different fire departments here, with 2 trucks usually parked very close by. So this was like a volunteer fire department which was staffed by the people who work in these facilities, who were not on the assembly lines, and they can immediately respond to everything with their fire engines. It's like a full-blown fire department multiplied by 8 just for this. 3 cafeterias plus the executive cafeteria. I've never gotten up there. We have no clue what food they got. That was always kept secret. You could see sometimes the catering events coming by with the cooks with their hats and speaking French, then you knew it probably was a little bit better than what we were getting down here in the cafeteria. But I have to say one thing, even back in the late 80s, the cafeteria was subsidized by Mercedes-Benz. The lunch was 2 Deutschmarks, which was $1 at the time. It was a 1-to-2 exchange rate in the 1987, 1988, somewhere around there. And you had an option of 3 full-blown dishes, for lunch, dinner, and breakfast. They served everything there depending on the shifts. So you had you could pick everything, and the food they did cook was cooked there, was prepared there. So it wasn't brought in, from some outside source. They had their own cooks there, their own nutritionists, and all of this happy stuff. And happy, well-fed people work well if you don't have to sleep off the food first during work. But I would say for the amount of money spent and the food received, you had a salad, you had the soup, you had the, traditional German dishes we had. And then they had an alternative, for not vegetarian, wasn't that big at that time, but for the people who are Muslims. So when we got pork was the main big staple for us. They had pork-free food for the Turkish guest workers we had, and that sort of stuff. And I hope that this kind of gave you an idea of my time there, of what I know. I can tell you one thing, and this was the reason why I decided, like I said before, to make these videos, was that there aren't any videos. So if you work here and you work with the R&D, designing engine, building engine on an assembly line, is a very different thing than repairing an engine after 33 years. It's a completely different ballgame. So I had to learn in my repair efforts here, or restoration efforts, restoration, upkeep, whatever you want to call it. That was quite an interesting experience, because an engine on a test stand, brand new, put together, will have very different issues from the assembly, from the very first assembly. It could be possible that you're experiencing same issues when you assemble a engine or when you rebuild an engine. A test stand like this, test booth would come in handy if you do it, because you can test the whole thing out before you ever put it in the count. You know exactly what the engine will do, and you can see how far off you are with this, that, and the other thing. But yeah, that's a very, very different story. So this was my time here. Do I miss it? That would be a yes and no. It was definitely an interesting experience, and by the time I came to America, it was probably a time for me to have moved on to new things. I'm pretty sure that some of these things are still the same over there in Untertürkheim. Some of the stuff has probably changed now. The big thing is going to be now electric vehicles. They had electric vehicles already back then here on the test track and driving out there, out of these holes down here, with a huge battery that was a T model. They had put an electric motor in there, and they also did the what was it, H2 cars, hybrids with gas and with H2, and then the electric cars. They have been working on that for a long time. I'm pretty sure with whatever Mercedes-Benz is going to do is going to be something else, and it's going to leave in the end Tesla in the dust. That I'm certain about it, because Tesla has never set foot into this. And there's a corporate philosophy there. It's the nature of the people who live and work there, the Swabians, with all people from all over the world back then already, in the different departments. It is truly an international corporation. It was many different languages were spoken there because of expertise, or just of availability and skills and that sort of stuff. And they're going to do what they need to do. Eventually the electric car will come. There's no question about it. They have already announced that the end of the combustion engine is over or near, and that will reflect itself in the parts availability. So if you're working on your car I can only urge you to get the parts you need now, even if you don't need them, and you may need them in 5 years from now. A lot of these parts will no longer be available. Then you either have to find out on how to rebuild the parts, like the fuel distributor, like the air mixture unit with changing the bearings, overhauling the throttle and repair, everything. The steering system, the steering pump overhaul, the overhaul I did on the hydraulic pump. This is something which is going to come. The manufacturers, there won't be many people out there, companies are going to do this for these exotic cars, which they're going to be at that point. To get your parts rebuild this, you have to acquire the skills to rebuild stuff, acquire the tools to rebuild them properly, because otherwise this will not work right. And acquire the knowledge. This is not going to be your shade tree mechanic operation which is going to sustain these cars, only to a certain extent. Learn how to solder. You will have to look into this and see how you can repair or have the electronic units repaired out of all these different vehicles, not just the 126 that is basically anything, including until what is coming out now. And as more electronics you got, as more difficult this whole thing will be. This is just food for thought. I can only give you suggestions here. And I have bought everything I need and then some for my car. I probably can redo 3 or 4 560s at this point, and I did this on purpose. I have my own warehouse right here at home. And with that, you have a wonderful evening.